This is the Chris Berry Show. Expert information on elder law, retirement, and estate planning. Information that you can understand. Here's your host, Chris Berry.
Welcome to the Chris Berry Show, where we talk wealth, estate, and tax planning for the second half of life. And this week, just like every week, we start with a positive focus, so something positive that happens in the previous week. And it's something that I share with my family when we sit down for dinner, and it's something that in our team meetings, we start the meetings off with a positive focus, where each one of our team members goes around and shares something positive that happened. Well, this week, I want to share something personally. My dad, he actually turned 75, so it was his 75th birthday yesterday. And I would love to have him on today, but he's flying off to head out on a cruise. So it's a good way to celebrate a birthday. But I thought we'd talk about legacy and maybe some of the legacy that my dad has created and is passing on to me, as well as passing on to my children, his grandchildren. So a little bit about my dad. He was a professor. I guess still is a professor, but he got his PhD from U of M. Actually, he's originally from California, and he moved out to Michigan to start work at Oakland Community College. So if you know Dr. Berry, if you went to OCC, the Orchard Ridge campus, then you probably met my dad. But he originally grew up in California. So I have a common last name at Berry. So everyone asks me if I know this Berry or that Berry or Chuck Berry. And Chuck Berry, he's not a brother from a different mother. But I tell them no. Chances are no, because I'm an only child, and my dad was an only child, and I think my grandfather changed our name from Berry to Yagashinsky. So unless there's changed our name from Yagashinsky to Berry, thankfully. So unless there's some Yagashinskys running around from the West Coast originally, then chances are I'm not related. And the funny thing along those lines is actually we can trace my heritage a little bit farther back than great-grandfather Yagashinsky. My dad actually was able to trace his heritage back to two famous people that made some poor choices. So two people in our history who made some poor choices. One of them very famous, the other one not so famous. But the famous one was actually Benedict Arnold. So somehow my dad was able to trace our heritage back to Benedict Arnold. So think about the classic person choosing the wrong side, making the wrong decision at the wrong time, comes to a fork in the road, and boy, has anyone ever made a worse decision ever. So the first one was Benedict Arnold. So that kind of set a stage for some people on my dad's side making poor choices at the wrong time. And then shortly after that, apparently my family headed west, as most families did at the time, and headed west. And I think we had some farmland in the Pennsylvania area. But unfortunately, the farmland, it was hard to farm because there was this black stuff that was coming up from the ground. And so, of course, what would you do is you would sell that property because you can't farm. Little did we know that that black stuff was the black gold. So I easily could have been one of the Beverly Hillbillies, but instead the family decided to sell the farm without researching or asking the right questions about this black stuff coming up from the ground. So yeah, people ask me, are you related to a Berry? Chances are no, unless they were originally a Yagashinsky like I was. But I'll take Berry. I think the Chris Berry Show sounds better than the Chris Yagashinsky Show. Nothing against the Polish heritage, but it just rings off the tongue a little better, saying Berry instead of Yagashinsky. So in addition to obviously the last name, I've learned a lot from my father. And a lot of life lessons, some of them from just kind of observing how he gets things done. So one of the big things or the big values that I've learned from my father was education. So when I was growing up, there was never a choice. I was going to college. It wasn't even an option for me. And just like my dad, he ended up getting his PhD from U of M. I went on to further schooling after undergrad, going into law school. And even my undergrad, I was following my father's footsteps. I had a psychology degree, which is what my dad obviously specialized in. But I always had this love of learning that I really think I learned from my father. And so my dad, he did go to U of M, got his PhD from U of M. So I grew up in a bedroom that was painted maize and blue, had U of M helmets and blankets and everything. And of course, where I chose to go to law school was Michigan State. So I think it was just a way to, my way to rebel. And now most likely my kids will end up going to Ohio State and Notre Dame just to spite all of us. But I'm going to try my hardest to stop that. So one thing that I learned from him was just that love of education. Even though I've graduated law school, I've went on to gain additional certifications, a certified elder law attorney, which you have to study for and pass an exam, as well as a certified bucket plan advisor, financial planner. So I'm constantly learning, constantly reading, just like my father. Then another thing is I've followed in his footsteps with regards to teaching, and not only getting educated myself and constantly learning myself, but also being an educator, sharing the knowledge that I've learned. So my father, he was a professor for 47 years at Oakland Community College, and I went on to be an adjunct professor, teach a couple of years at Western Michigan Cooley Law School, where I taught second and third year law students estate planning and elder law. So I've followed in his footsteps there. Also, he's a great coach. He coached me in soccer and basketball growing up, and also coached junior college basketball at Oakland Community College for a couple of years. And I've done a little bit of coaching. I coached some JV soccer a little while ago at Novi High School. But he was always a great coach. And I try to do the same thing with my kids, trying to coach them on whatever endeavors they're getting into. My kids right now are in jiu-jitsu, and they're loving that. So the role of a coach is something that I've learned from my father. Then service, something that my dad has always been a big part of him, whether he shows it or talks about it or not, is service. He's always willing to lend a hand and be service to the people that he cares about. And he's always a hard worker, too. And I think I try to follow in his footsteps to be a good provider for my family and a hard worker, keeping my nose to the grindstone. Another thing, and this is a big one, is that I know he's touched a lot of lives. So his role as a professor and dean at a community college, it's just amazing the number of lives that he's touched. For a while there, when we would travel, he couldn't go anywhere without running into at least one of his students. We'd be up in Toronto or down in Florida, and someone would call out, "Dr. Barry, Dr. Barry." And then, of course, my dad, he can't remember everyone's name, so he used a little secret. He called everyone Scholar. So he's like, "Hey, Scholar." So it's just amazing to think about the number of lives that he's touched. And similarly with the work that I do, with this radio show, with the workshops that we do on a regular basis, I feel like we do a great job of touching lives and improving lives and leaving people better for having met with us or worked with us. And I think that's something that I've taken from my father, is that he was memorable. Lots of people, years after they had him, had remembered him and remembered his class. And talking to the other teachers at OCC, they all speak fondly of him. So he's touched a lot of lives, and that's something that of the things that I'm taking from him, hopefully I can follow in his footsteps. Also, he's very intelligent. And I like to think of myself as at least relatively intelligent, but able to have intellectual conversations, kind of being a problem solver. And if anything, my dad is super smart, one of the smartest people that I've talked to. And then I kind of touched upon this, but he's a constant learner. And he's always, even now, reading or researching, whether it's in books or he's figured out how to use an iPad on his iPad. And that's something that a lot of times at night when the kids are down and we're not flipping on a TV, a lot of times I'm sitting there reading a book, whether it's something on law or finance or running a business or just being a better person. And then there's some fun reading in there as well, but a big reader and a constant learner. And a lot of those things are things that I hope to be able to pass down to my children as well. My children are now 8 and 5, so Madison, or 8 and 6. I forgot Madison just had her birthday. She's 6. I can't forget that. She'd yell at me. But Ryan is 8 and Madison is 6. So I hope to be able to follow in my father's footsteps and leave a lot of those things as a legacy that as I get older, they're able to pick up. Things like being a lifelong learner, education, being a hard worker, not complaining about things. Those are things that it's part of the Barry way, the Yagashinsky way, if you will, is leaving that legacy. And that's what a lot of people don't realize. Is legacy, it's not always about money. It's about things like that, about some intangible. But when we're talking about estate planning and financial planning, a lot of times we also are talking about leaving a legacy. So that's going to be the focus of the show today, is leaving a legacy. And what type of legacy do you want to live? And it's not always about financial assets or material wealth. It's about when you're gone, how are people going to remember you? And my dad's not gone. He just turned 75. But I thought it would be a good time to talk about things like that. And so at the most basic level, a lot of the families that we work with, they do want to leave a legacy, and sometimes financially, but at the very least, they want to be known as not leaving a mess. And that's why a lot of people make sure that they set up a good plan, a good financial plan, a good estate plan, so that when they do pass away, because we haven't figured out a way how not to avoid that, but when they do pass away and go on to the next step, what is the legacy they're going to leave? Did they have all their ducks in a row, or is their family now having to go to probate? Is there fighting after you've gone? So think about kind of the legacy that you want to leave. How do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as, you know what, mom and dad, they set up everything up so it was a smooth transition? Or do you want to be one of those situations where, and we've had this in our office, where everything was unorganized, the family brings in a shoebox worth of 27 different accounts, and it's just ongoing stress and struggles during an already stressful situation of the loss of a loved one. And then it does get into leaving material things too. Some of the families, I kind of joke around that the best estate planners go when the last check bounces, but some families do want to leave things to the next generation, or even to the following generation, leaving things to the grandchildren. So on this show today, we're going to spend some time talking about the best ways, or how to leave a legacy of your choice, not leaving it up to the government to decide. And we're going to talk about some financial and legal and tax strategies. And when we're talking about a legacy, we're not just talking about leaving things to the next generation, but we're also talking about leaving things to a spouse and the spousal legacy. And we're going to get into that in our second segment when we get into this discussion more. And we're going to talk about some of the ways that you need to think about not just leaving things to the kids, but also leaving things to the spouse. So if you are a married couple and something happens to one of you, making sure that you don't leave your spouse in a bind. So we're going to cover some of those things on the second segment today. And then the third segment, we're going to get into your questions and answers. So if you do have a question for us, and we'll go ahead and read some of those on air, you can give us a call anytime at 810-355-2584, or you can email us anytime at askchris@thechrisberryshow. Again, ask Chris at The Chris Berry Show. You can also go online to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, where you can submit any questions you have there online. And I was looking at some of the questions, so we have some questions from our guest last week, Jenny Jarvis with the Area Agency on Aging. She was talking about the Michigan Choice Waiver Program, so we'll talk a little bit about that in our questions and answers this week. But if you do have any questions, feel free, again, call us anytime at 810-355-2584. Or if you want to get those questions answered live at one of our upcoming Clarity Building workshops, we do have a workshop coming up this next week. So this upcoming week, we're going to have a workshop coming up on the 19th. So the 19th at our Ann Arbor office, we're going to have a workshop on Wednesday at 10 a.m. On Tuesday, the 18th, at our Brighton workshop, we're going to have the same workshop at our Brighton office. So that's going to be Tuesday, the 18th at 10 a.m. in Brighton. And then on Wednesday, the 19th at 10 a.m. at our Ann Arbor office. So if you do want more information on those workshops, visit our website at thechrisberryshow.com, and you can click through and register for one of those workshops. And in those workshops, We're not selling anything. You can't buy anything. Completely educational. But it just gives a great opportunity to learn the basics of financial planning, estate planning, tax planning for retirement for the second half of life in a very no salesy educational format. We're not selling anything. There's no steak dinners or anything. All we have are some waters and cookies for you. And for the first 3 people that register for each of these workshops, we actually give them a copy of our book, Tax-Free Money for Long-Term Care. So if you are lucky enough to be one of the first 3 people that register, you do get a free copy of the book. And those are going to be Tuesday the 18th at 10 a.m. in Brighton and Wednesday the 19th at 10 a.m. at our Ann Arbor office. So stick with us as we continue to discuss the concept of leaving a legacy. What do you want to be known for? And again, I shared some of the things that already my father's taught me, and these are things that I want to leave to my children, and they have nothing to do with material wealth. These are the lessons of a family. So I want these to be the things that get passed down, and I want to be remembered for not the Benedict Arnold or moving off of the oil-filled land in Pennsylvania. So it's about leaving a legacy of learning, of education, of being a teacher and a coach, of hard work, touching lives, being intelligent, constant learner, constantly trying to improve. Hopefully I can do a great job of leaving things to my children the way that my father has to me. So join us in the next segment as we continue this discussion of legacy.
Certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton can help you protect your assets from the cost of long-term care, and they can also help you with estate planning, like they did for Linda Emerson.
I had to redo my will. It weighed on me that I hadn't changed it. I wanted to make everything easy for my daughter whenever I do keel over. But I went in, it was very professional, and sat down with Chris. I would definitely suggest him because he knows his stuff and he's not aggressive. He's, very friendly and makes you feel comfortable because I think he realizes it's not a comfortable thing for people. It was just an easy process. I came out of it and I told my daughter, "It's all yours, kiddo."
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800, 810-214-3800.
Welcome back to the Chris Berry Show, where we talk about estate and tax planning for the second half of life. And so in our first segment, we talked about, or started the conversation surrounding legacy. And I brought up my father's 75th birthday, 3/4 of a century. You learn some things over that time and talk about this idea of passing on a legacy of both non-material as well as material things. And so now I want to focus on kind of the financial and estate planning side of leaving a legacy, and tax planning, to be honest, as well. So when we talk about legacy, too often people assume we're just talking about leaving things to the kids. And that's not the case at all. Really, when we talk about legacy, we're talking about leaving things first to a spouse. So, and this is one of the important parts of putting together a retirement plan, is understanding what happens if one spouse passes away. So I saw a recent article written by Julie Halpert, who I think is in Michigan, but she wrote an article with the title of "Half of Widows See Their Income Drop by 50%. Be ready. When your spouse passes away, you don't have to struggle financially." And I thought it was an important article that I don't think enough people are talking about with regards to the idea of what happens when one spouse passes away. So let's say the breadwinner, the big money earner, is the one that passes away first. Well, what ends up happening there? Well, initially we're going to have an immediate drop of income because we've lost one earner's income, and especially the bigger earner of the two. Now, keep in mind that if you have a married couple and one spouse passes away, the surviving spouse will get bumped up to the higher of the two Social Security streams. So let's say you have a husband, his Social Security is $2,000 a month, wife's Social Security is $1,000 a month. Together they have $3,000 a month coming in. Well, if husband passes away, what happens is that wife gets bumped up to the $2,000 a month Social Security benefit. But still, if you look at it overall, the family has just lost $1,000 of income. And that's just talking about Social Security. What about if there's a pension? So if there's a pension, now husband, in addition to his $2,000 a month Social Security, might have a $2,000 a month pension on top of that. And then we have to look at, did he make a spousal election to allow the pension to continue on for the surviving spouse? And that's something that you can't really change. Once you set it up, once you fire that bullet is fired. So now let's say that he did have a pension, but he did not elect the survivorship benefit. He opted for a larger pension while he was alive. So let's say he has a $2,000 Social Security, a $2,000 pension, and now wife has $1,000 a month of Social Security total. So that's $5,000 a month coming in. Well, what happens now if husband passes away? What does that $5,000 a month drop down to? Well, that $5,000 a month, because now we've lost his pension, that's just completely gone. Wife gets a bump up on Social Security, so now she's at $2,000 a month. But as you see, we just went from $5,000 a month of income to $2,000 a month worth of income for that surviving spouse. Now, keep in mind, what happens a lot of times in retirement is that when the one spouse passes away, the income can drop over 50, maybe even over 50%, as in this situation. But on top of the income dropping, what else happens? Well, the expenses typically don't go down that much. Typically, the expenses are relatively fixed. So you have an income drop of over 50%. The expenses remain the same, so that's going to put the surviving spouse in a tough spot. And then on top of that, what else happens when that first spouse passes away? Well, when that first spouse passes away, we go from married filing jointly to now single filing. And so our income drops on the top end, and on the bottom end or on the back end, that surviving spouse typically has to pay more taxes now. So the surviving spouse really can be hit when it comes to talking about leaving a legacy. So some things to think about with regards to this is first of all, look at figure out that income stream for that surviving spouse. So maybe there's some things that we need to do to make sure that that surviving spouse has enough income to maintain their lifestyle. Maybe it's looking at life insurance. Maybe it's looking at joint guaranteed income annuities that run for both spouses' lifetime. Maybe it's looking at long-term care insurance or with a life insurance component built in, so that if they need long-term care or pass away, we're protecting that surviving spouse. So there's things that need to be thought about there. And when we talk about like putting together a plan for retirement, we need to factor in things like what happens if one spouse passes away early. Because we need to make sure that that surviving spouse can maintain their lifestyle, because their income is going to drop sometimes as much as 50%, and their taxes are going to go up and the expenses are going to remain the same. So it's something that really needs to be discussed. And if you're not having these discussions, I really think you need to. And so some things to think about would be making sure that you create and update and have the right critical documents. So the right documents as it relates to estate planning. So, and reviewing the beneficiary designation. So make sure that you've appointed spouse maybe first to make financial and medical decisions, and then make sure that you have backups. So if something were to happen to that spouse, you have a backup in place. And if that surviving spouse, or if that first spouse were to pass away, that would be a great time to take another look at those estate planning documents, make sure that we do have backups in place. Basically, anytime there's a big life change, that's a time to review your estate plan. And then also, it's very important, review your beneficiary designations. So who have you named as a beneficiary of your 401k, your IRA? Make sure that you've appointed the right people. Make sure that you have backups in place. And then know where to find your paperwork. Make sure that if something were to happen, you have access to the paperwork. You know where the estate plan is. A lot of times we recommend for your medical directives, put them in an envelope near the fridge. Put a copy there. So if you're running out the door because there's been some type of event, you're going to have these documents. You can grab them versus trying to find your estate plan. And then it's important to just really understand the impact, the real impact with the loss of a spouse. So there's financial things to take into account. There's tax things to take into account. But also just the idea of that person may need support because a lot of times they've lost someone that they spent a lot of time with. So this is where a lot of times families might look at transitioning to independent living or assisted living if we are in a long-term care situation to make sure that that person is receiving the care and receiving their needs are met both from a long-term care as well as just from a community standpoint. So those are some important things to think about with regards to leaving a legacy. So a legacy isn't just about leaving a legacy to children, it's also leaving a legacy to a spouse. And also something that we talk about, and this is important while both spouses are around, is how do you want to leave things to that surviving spouse? Do you want to leave things outright? Well, the concern we have with that is that if you were to leave things outright to your spouse, what happens if that spouse, after you pass away, remarries? And then what happens if that surviving spouse were to then pass away after that remarriage? Who might not get anything? The kids. And that might be okay or maybe not, but this is one of the things we talk about in our workshop, is the idea of, we call this the Elaine situation. So let's assume we have husband and wife, and we have husband and wife, been married for a number of years. They have children together. And then the wife passes away. Where's all the assets going to go? Of course, to the husband. So let's say the husband grieves for a month. Elaine comes around wearing a short, skimpy dress, bringing home-cooked meals, taking care of husband. Husband falls in love. Husband gets married. And then what happens when husband passes away? Where might the assets go? Well, the assets might go to the Elaines of the world versus going where maybe they originally wanted the assets to go, to the kids. So what we can do with proper trust planning is build in spousal protection so that if one spouse passes away, the assets could be held for the surviving spouse, where the surviving spouse can access that for their needs, utilize it for their needs. If they need the money, they can go in and take it. But whatever they decide to leave in the trust would be protected so that if they were to remarry the Elaines or the Pool Boys, so it can be either way, that whatever they decide to keep in the trust would be protected so that that money wouldn't go to the Elaines of the world, would go down where the family originally said it should, which was to the children or the original beneficiaries. And a lot of times when I bring this up in the workshops or sitting down with clients, a lot of times they're like nodding their head like, oh, that happened to my uncle, or that happened to my dad, or that happened to grandpa, or I know the Elaine, she's on her fifth husband. But that's something through planning we can control the legacy that we leave behind, because you don't want to be most likely remembered as the person that fell for the Elaines of the world or the Pool Boys. So again, it's about controlling the legacy. And the legacy isn't just talking about leaving things to the children, it's also revolves around leaving things to a spouse. And then let's say that now that surviving spouse has passed away. Now we're going to leave things to the kids. And again, I said sometimes the best estate planners go when the last check bounces. But if you do intend to leave any type of inheritance to your children or your beneficiaries, we need to decide how do we want to leave things to them. And so if you remember, there's 4 ways assets pass out of your name when you pass away. The first way is through joint ownership. And I wouldn't recommend naming any of your kids jointly on any of your accounts. The second way would be through beneficiary designations. So we call this the pillowcase of money approach. All you're doing is launching pillowcases money at your beneficiaries. So if you name your son or daughter as beneficiary of the IRA goes directly to them. But then what happens if there's a divorce, lawsuit, creditor action, bankruptcy? That money could be lost. So we don't really like naming kids outright as beneficiaries. And then what about the third way? That would be a trust. And we have different types of trusts. But with a trust, we can control the distribution and maybe protect our beneficiaries. But if an asset doesn't pass through joint ownership, beneficiary designation, trust, then it ends up going into probate. And that's that court process that many of the families, they don't want to send their loved ones through probate. They don't want to send them to courts where there's additional hassles and court costs and filing fees and inventory fees and sometimes attorney fees. What kind of legacy would that be to send your family to court upon death? So many families want to rely on a method of transferring assets upon death other than through probate. And that takes us back to joint ownership, beneficiary designation, or trust. And a lot of people, not all, but a lot of people do utilize a trust as a way to leave things to the beneficiary, to leave that legacy, that monetary or legacy to the beneficiaries. And there's two types of ways really to leave things to the kids. Well, there's multiple ways, but typically we see one of two ways. So the first way would be to leave it to them outright. So, and this might take the form of saying it's held in trust until the kids reach a certain age, whether it's 25, 30, or 35. But with this, all you're doing is really launching pillowcases of money over what I call the wall of time. Because what happens if you set up a trust and say, okay, it goes to my kids outright at 25, 30, 35. Well, what happens if your daughter gets a divorce at age 36? Where might half of that money go? It might go in that divorce. Or what happens even worse, if your daughter were to pass away at age 36? Where does that money now go? It goes to an in-law who might remarry. We call those the outlaws versus going down to the beneficiaries. So instead of this pillowcase of money approach, what's another way that we can handle this? Another way we could handle this is inside of a trust, utilize a type language. We call it a legacy inheritance trust. A legacy inheritance trust. So that whatever you leave to the next generation, to your children or your beneficiaries, whatever you leave to them could be held in a way that is protected from a divorce, protected from a lawsuit, protected from long-term care costs, protected from creditors. And whatever they decide to leave in the trust would be protected from all these things. And then if they were to pass away, whatever they have in trust, it doesn't go to the in-law who might remarry, but could go down to the grandchildren. So that in essence, you're leaving a real legacy to the next generation. So that whatever they decide to leave in the trust, they're going to have peace of mind to know that it's protected. That even if life throws them a curveball, they're going to be protected. That if they were to get a divorce, whatever's in trust would be protected. And that's a powerful legacy to know that a loved one has done this for you, that they've taken steps to ensure that whatever you inherit from them is protected for their lifetime. And this is very different than most of the trusts that we see and we review in our office. Most of the trusts say that it goes outright to the kids or the beneficiaries at specific times, say age 25, 30, 35. Again, all you're doing is launching a pillowcase of money over what I call the wall of time. So instead of launching those pillowcases money over the wall of time, instead we could leave it to the children in a manner where they could be the trustees, they could be in charge, they could receive all the income, they could decide how the assets are invested, but whatever they decide to leave in the trust would be protected from a divorce, a lawsuit, a creditor action, a bankruptcy. And this is language we could build into your revocable living trust. In this language, we call it a legacy inheritance trust. So if you were to have 3 kids, it could split into 3 separate shares, 1 share for each child. And whatever they decide to leave in the trust would be protected from a nursing home, Medicaid, long-term care, divorces, creditors, etc. Then if they pass away, that money goes to the next generation. So that's just some more talk on legacy. Stick with me after the break.
If you or a loved one is facing long-term care costs, make sure you talk with certified elder law attorney Chris Berry from the Elder Care Firm, like Jennifer did from Howell.
This past summer, my mom had to transition into a nursing home. So we contacted Chris to help get things in order. You know, I wanted the best. I wanted somebody who knew what they were doing. Chris was able to help save a lot of that money that my mom and dad both worked so hard for. I thought that everything would have to go to the nursing home, but it didn't. He was able to save us half of everything that would have gone if we hadn't contacted the Elder Care Firm. And we're all happy about that. Don't go to the nursing home without contacting Chris first.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Protect your assets from probate, long-term care costs, the IRS, and get the governmental benefits you deserve. Visit theeldercarefirm.com today or call 810-214-3800. 810-214-3800. 3800.
Welcome back. And so in our last segment, we're talking about legacy. Our last two segments, we're talking about legacy. And in our first segment, I talked about a legacy that my father is leaving. He's just turned 75. Seemed like a good time to talk about lessons I've learned from my father. In our last segment, we got into talking about legacy more from a financial, legal, and tax standpoint. So think about legacy as it relates to leaving things to a spouse, making sure that your spouse is going to have the income that he or she needs to continue to maintain a lifestyle. And then after the spouse, leaving things to the next generation. How are we going to leave things to the next generation? Are we going to leave it to them in a way that's protected? Or are we going to leave it to them in a way that it could be lost because life throws them a curveball? So just think about that. Think about the legacy that you want to leave. Do you want to leave a mess for the next generation to clean up where you didn't have your ducks in a row? Or do you want everything organized so it's a smooth transition? And that's things that we talk about in our clarity building workshops. So we do our free clarity building workshops where we talk legal, financial, and tax planning for the second half of life. We do about once a week. And this week we have two workshops coming up, one at our Brighton office and one at our Ann Arbor office, Tuesday and Wednesday. And if you want some more information on those, please go to our website, thechrisberryshow.com, and there's a link where you can click through to the workshops, or you can give us a call at 810-355-2584, or you can email us anytime at askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. Again, askchris@thechrisberryshow.com. And so in our third segment, what we're going to do is get into some of the questions and answers that we've had from our listeners. And the first question is from Pat. And Pat is asking from last week, where we had Jenny Jarvis from Area Agency on Aging talking about the My Choice Waiver Program. Pat asked whether, as a married couple, if they look at both spouses' income and assets as it relates to the Michigan Choice Waiver Program, the My Choice program. Do they look at income and assets for eligibility of both spouses if just one spouse were to need care? And the answer to this, Pat, is that yes, they do look at both spouses' assets. So they look at the joint assets. They look at assets just in the healthy spouse's name. They look at assets just in the sick spouse's name as well. All assets. So whether it's a husband or a wife or a spouse, all of the assets count. Now, with income, it works a little bit differently. With regards to income, they only look at the income of the spouse who needs care. And that person, that spouse that needs care, needs to be under roughly $2,100 a month of income, looking at Social Security and pension. Now, you might have assets that generate income, like retirement accounts. Those aren't income streams. Those are assets that generate income. And so to deal with those, we need to deal with it as an asset, and that generally works out the income piece of things. So for that Michigan Choice Waiver Program that provides care at home, it is based on the Medicaid program. So there is an asset test associated with it as well as an income test. Now, that income test, again, let me stress, for a individual to receive care, they need less than roughly $2,100 a month worth of income. But that's just for the My Choice program, the Medicaid program at home. When we talk about nursing home Medicaid, there really is no income test. So a lot of people get that confused. They think, oh, I have too much income, I can't qualify for Medicaid in the nursing home. Really, when we're talking about Medicaid in a nursing home, we're strictly focusing on the asset side of the table. So we look at 401ks, IRAs, checking, savings, mutual funds, stocks, bonds, etc. All of those are assets. What we're less concerned with is Social Security and pension. That typically has to go to the nursing home as part of what's called the patient pay amount. That has to be paid to the nursing home. So it's an important distinction. They are both funded through the Medicaid program, the My Choice Waiver, as well as nursing home Medicaid, but they work slightly differently. So getting back to your question, Pat, they do look at both spouses' assets, but as it relates to income, they're only looking at the income of the spouse who needs care. So hopefully that was helpful. Now, getting into our next question. Our next question is from Bob. And Bob asks, who will get my mom's husband's house after he passes away? My mom bought her house after my parents sold their house. A few years later, my mom remarried. Sometime after that, my mom added her husband to the deed. For the last 6 years of my mom's life, I took care of mom due to her health, and she lived with me. At the time she had herself taken care of home, my mom passed away in 2015. Her husband was in the house, and now he's sick. If he passes, will it go to his kids, or will it go to all of us? So kind of ironic, this is what we're talking about, leaving a legacy. And good time to ask this question. So just like we talked about in the last segment, Bob, this is that Elaine situation that we talked about, only in reverse. So this would be the pool boy situation. If you attend one of our workshops, we talk about it. So mom owned a house. Mom and dad owned a house. Dad passed away. The house went to mom. And then mom remarried and added husband to the deed. And now when mom passes away, guess what happens? It was owned joint ownership, and now that home passes to the new husband, and so now it's in his name. And now it's all up to, looks like he's still alive, but he's sick. It's now all up to his estate plan to decide where the home goes. So does he have a trust? Does he have a will? Has he done a ladybird deed, which says the home is in your name while you're alive, but then when you pass away, it avoids probate and goes to whoever's named as a beneficiary. So most likely, husband, he might not have an estate plan. And if that's the case and he passes away and the home is just in his name, then what happens with that home is that it enters probate court and follows the rules, we call it dying intestate. And what that means is you've died without a will. You've died without an estate plan. And now, instead of creating your own rule book, creating a ladybird deed, creating a trust, deciding where your stuff is going to go, you're relying on the government's rule book to decide where your stuff goes. So unfortunately in this situation, Bob, with mom naming husband joint after dad died, and then mom passing away, even though you were a caregiver, that doesn't give you an entitlement to the house. Now that mom has passed away, that home has transferred to husband, most likely, as joint ownership with right of survivorship. Now, you might have a chance if they held the property as tenants in common, but most likely it was held as joint ownership with right of survivorship. So what that means is when mom passed away, that the deed entirely ended up transferring to husband. And now it's up to husband to decide what happens with the property. If he puts together a estate plan, a trust, or a ladybird deed, it can go to anyone he wants. If he doesn't do anything at all, then it's going to most likely enter probate and then follow the default rules of Michigan that say that it'll go to a closest relative. So intestacy rules in Michigan say it goes to a spouse. If not a spouse, then children. If not children, back up to parents. And when we're talking about children, it's not mom's children and husband's children. It's only husband's children. So it sounds like in this situation, mom's house that transferred to husband now is probably going to go to husband's kids, not split evenly amongst all of the children. So I wish I had better news. If husband is agreeable, there's still things that could be done now, but basically husband would have to sign off. Otherwise, you have to go to court to try to fight this. So hopefully that was helpful, Bob. Now our next question is from Trent. Do I owe on taxes on property that was gifted to me when I sell the home? So my mom gifted the house last year. If I don't rent it, I'm thinking of selling it. What percentage of taxes should I expect to pay? I think she bought the home for around $450,000, and it's probably worth double now. So what will I owe in terms of taxes? So in this situation, a lot of questions regarding real estate. So in this situation, mom has gifted her house to you, and now you're looking at selling it. Now, what's going to happen, Trent, is that you're most likely going to lose what's called step up in basis. So when you receive a home through death, whether it's probate or taxes, whether it's probate or through a trust or a will or a ladybird deed, you get what's called a step up in basis. So an example of how that would work is if mom bought her house for $100,000, it's valued at $200,000. Mom passes away and leaves it to you through a ladybird deed, which says it's in mom's name while you're alive, and then when you pass away, it avoids probate and goes to you. Or if she were to leave it through a trust, you get what's called step up in basis. And what that means is even though the home is now valued at $200,000 and mom originally bought it at $100,000, when you go sell it, you get a step up in basis. So instead of the basis being $100,000, which it should be, you get a basis of $200,000. So if you're to sell the home for $200,000, then there would be no difference between the basis and the actual selling price. So you would owe zero in taxes. But through joint ownership, you have to maintain that original basis. And so when you go to sell something that's doubled in value, you're probably going to have to revert back to the value of the home when mom initially bought that. So you're going to have to most likely, and again, sit down with a professional, but most likely what you're going to have to do is pay tax on those gains. Now, it would be capital gains, so it's better than income tax, but you would still have to pay that tax. So that's another one of those reasons why we're not a huge fan of joint ownership as a way to transfer property or gifting. Gifting can be potentially hazardous as well. So, and that's one of the things that we talk about in our Clarity Builder workshops that we have usually once or twice a week at one of our different locations. Again, this Tuesday and Wednesday, we're going back to back. We have one 10 a.m. in Brighton on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday we have another one at in Ann Arbor office at 10 a.m. as well. And usually these workshops last about an hour to an hour and a half, depending on the questions. And it is an opportunity to ask questions, and it's going to be the cheapest time you ever spend with an attorney. So make sure to ask a lot of questions because you'll get your money's worth. Now, moving on to our next question. Our next question is, how do I start growing a nest egg for retirement with very little savings? Well, that's the question, isn't it? And this is from Sean. How do I start saving for retirement with less than $5,000? I'm receiving monthly survivor's benefits and want to put the money in some kind of savings that will build a nest egg. Recent bank experience just showed that I don't know what I'm doing, and my bank isn't a big help. 1 year of a $1,000 CD yielded me $2.50. I'm very disappointed and need a better plan for how to grow my money. All right, Sean. So you have the right mindset, and whether it's a large amount or a small amount. For example, my daughter, she just lost her front tooth, one of her teeth, and this was her first tooth, and we had a discussion about the tooth fairy and compound interest. And even though it's $5 that if she would put it into the bank, I'd throw in another $5, doubling her money. And then you add on compound interest. If you don't touch that for a while, you make that sacrifice, then that money will grow. So in this situation, you're right. CDs, they're not yielding much right now. In fact, you can find some like online savings options that offer you a better rate of return than some of these CDs. One of the things we saw come across was what we call a MYGA, which is kind of like an insurance version of a CD that was offering much better rates if you're willing to let the company hold on to the investment for, say, 3 years or 5 years, typically getting better rates than CDs. But we always have to start with the goal in mind. So we can talk tools all day, whether it's CD, annuity, mutual funds, brokerage accounts, stocks, bonds, Bitcoin. These are just tools. We always need to start with a plan and a goal. So that's where a lot of times from a financial standpoint, we like to figure out what is the purpose of the money? When do you plan on utilizing it? with that bucket plan concept of we're going to have money that's in our now bucket that we're going to need in the next year. And that money should be safe and liquid and available. So having that money in a CD where if you take it out within the year you're going to pay a penalty probably doesn't make sense, and I wouldn't recommend a CD. Then you have money that you're going to touch later. So this is your later bucket of money. And this money should be probably invested a little more aggressively and maybe invested more for growth or leaving it for a legacy. And when we're talking about legacy, again, remember, we're not just talking about leaving it to children or beneficiaries. We're also talking about a legacy for that surviving spouse. So if we feel that we're not going to touch this money for a period of time, say 5-10 years, then maybe we can invest it a little more aggressively, maybe turn to the market and allow the market to generate returns. And then we have our soon bucket, which is money we think we might need over the next 3 to 5 or 5 to 8 or depending on time frame, 5 to 10 years. And this money should be invested maybe a little bit more conservatively than that later bucket, but we should be able to get access to it if we need it. And the idea behind this is to protect against sequence of returns. We don't want to have to make big withdrawals from our assets just as the market goes down right when we need it, where you have a 2008 situation. So, Sean, I'd start with first figuring out what is the goal of the money, and then I could point you into the right direction, the right tool. So thank you, everyone, for your questions. I do appreciate them. Again, reach out to us anytime at 810-355-2584. I want to wish a one-day late happy birthday to my father, who just turned 75. And for you, think about a legacy and the legacy that you want to leave. Make it a great week. Thank you. Take care.
Learn more about Chris Berry and the Elder Care Firm by visiting online at MichiganEstatePlanning.com. That's MichiganEstatePlanning.com. You can also call Chris Berry at 888-390-4360. 888-390-4360. This program content reflects the opinions of Chris Berry and his guests, not the Elder Care Firm, Prosperity Capital Advisors, or the C.J. Berry Group, and is subject to change at any time without notice. Content provided herein is for informational purposes only and should not be used or construed as investment or legal advice or a recommendation regarding the purchase or sale of any security or to follow any legal or tax strategy. There's no guarantee that the strategist's statements, opinions, or forecast provided herein will prove to be correct. Past performance is not a guarantee of future results. Indices are not available for direct investment. Any investor who attempts to mimic the performance of an index would incur fees and expenses, which would reduce returns. All investing involves risk, including the potential for loss of principal. There's no guarantee that any investment plan or strategy will be successful. We recommend that you consult with a professional dedicated to your needs. This program is furnished by the Elder Care Firm.
The cost of long-term care can be overwhelming. If you're dealing with long-term care costs, make plans to attend the next free informative workshop from the Elder Care Firm in Brighton. They'll show you how to protect your hard-earned assets and obtain the governmental benefits you deserve, including veterans benefits and Medicaid.
Hello, I'm attorney Chris Berry. As the only certified elder law attorney in Livingston County, I have the knowledge and estate planning strategies to help you. When you call, reserve your seat at our next workshop or schedule a free 15-minute phone consultation. The Elder Care Firm is here to help you and your family find solutions. Call us today.
Spots are filling up for the next free Elder Care Firm workshop. Reserve your seat today by calling 810-214-3800 or visit theeldercarefirm.com. The Elder Care Firm also invites you to join them at this year's Walk to End Alzheimer's. The walk is on Saturday, October 1st in downtown Brighton. Call 810-214-3800 today.